Hi there, I'm Erica with A Needle and Thread in Spring, Texas. And in this series of tutorials that I'm going to do, I'm going to walk you through the instructions on how to make this 9-month Skill Builder Block of the Month quilt. It looks very intimidating. It really is not as intimidating as it seems. You can see right behind me on the wall, I have several of the blocks that have already started, and individually they are really not difficult to make. And so what we're going to do in each one of the videos here is go through one block at a time, talk about the cutting, talking about making each one of the elements for the blocks, and also putting the blocks together. By the end of the whole tutorial, you're going to have all of the skills that you need to move on to a more difficult quilt and to make other quilts with half square triangle blocks and flying geese and hourglass elements and all of those things with ease. All of the materials and the instructions can be purchased through my shop at aneedleandthread.com. The information will be in the description section below. If you'd like the kit for the fabrics that I used for these blocks, then you can purchase them through me. Now, the first block that we're going to do looks like this. Now, interestingly enough, each one of the month blocks gives you instructions not only to make the primary block, which is this yellow and red one down bottom, but it also gives you secondary instructions on how to make another, usually a smaller block that fits into the quilt also. This one I'm not going to make simply because the construction of this, for as much as it's a smaller size, the construction of this secondary block is the exact same as the primary block for this month. However, it does give you an opportunity to play with color. You can see that this one is only made up of two colors. It's that taupe and white, whereas the first one is larger and is made up of the three colors, yellow, red, and white. The colors that we're going to use today, we're going to have a green center with white accents, and then it's going to have the red on the outside. So if you look at this block right above me, the teal on that block is going to be red. Pinky red that's in the center of that block is going to be green. And then of course it's going to be accented with the white. Now the instructions give you directions to make 3 of these blocks, to cut 3 of these blocks at one time. And I've done that. I have all of the pieces for all 3 of those blocks, but we're only going to make 1. So the first thing we're going to do is make our half square triangle blocks. The block that we're making today is made up of 3 basic elements. The first one is a half square triangle block that you see drawn right here in yellow and white. The other one is made up of 2 rectangular strips that are sewn down the center to make a 4.5-inch square. And then the last is simply just this middle 4.5-inch square right there. So those 3 elements, based on how you turn them, those will make your block and change the way your block looks. So the first thing we're going to do is make this half square triangle block. So in order to make the half square triangle blocks, what I'm going to teach you how to do is a 2 at a time half square triangle block. Using a square of fabric, you're going to make 2 half square triangle blocks. Now the nice thing about this is that with quilting there are a lot of different ways to make certain elements that you need to make your blocks. Half square triangles and flying geese and your hourglass blocks, lots of different ways to make them. Traditionally what you would do is you would cut 2 triangles basically and sew those triangles together, but the problem with that is that if you cut a diagonal across your square, you're now cutting on the bias, and the bias of your fabric likes to stretch. It makes it a little bit more difficult to get a nice flat, stable half square triangle block. And so what quilters have come up with is the concept of using 2 pieces of fabric that are square, that are a little bit bigger than you need. You're going to draw a diagonal through the center, and then you're going to sew on either side of that diagonal. Once you've sewn your seam, you cut it in half, you end up with 2 half square triangle blocks. I'm going to show you how to do that. Per the instructions, I have 2 white 5-inch squares and 2 red 5-inch squares. These are going to make my half square triangle block. I'm going to use a ruler of some sort. You can either do it by drawing a line directly down the center of your block, or you can use one of these 1/4-inch rulers, and what that does, it puts the line a 1/4 inch from the center of your block. So here's the center at the point. Your lines are now a 1/4 inch off of that center, and we draw that line all the way down on either side. That's what you're going to sew on. I'm going to do it again on the other white piece of fabric that I have. This one turned out better. What I'll do now is place my red fabric face up, my white fabric with the lines on top, and then I'm going to pin. I'm pinning across my lines so that as I sew, it will be stable. Okay, so now I have my fabrics pinned together, I have my lines drawn, and I can sew on the lines. Let's go ahead and do that. So as I sew, I don't want to line up the line that I've drawn directly in the center of my presser foot. That would mean that I'm sewing directly on the line. What I do want to do is sew just on the inside of my seam allowance. It seems like a silly thing, not much of a difference there, but what that's going to allow is for a slightly larger half square triangle block once it's made, and I'll have a little bit more flexibility when it comes time to trim. So I start with my needle in the down position, and I'm just going to sew a hair to the inside. So what you can see here is that my line, my blue line, is on the outside of where my stitches are. That's what you're looking for, so that once we cut it in half, your half square triangle block, which is this area over here, will be a little bit larger with space for you to trim. All right, so I've cut my 2 squares apart. I showed you how I stitched just on the inside of that blue line. And now it's time for me to just slice the blocks in half. You can use a pair of scissors, you can use your rotary cutter, whatever you have will be fine. Now, normally as quilters, we are very, very concerned about our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that is the standard, and I don't want you to forget that. However, when you are cutting your half square triangle pieces apart, don't worry about an exact 1/4 inch. All we need is enough fabric in the seam allowance. Now the next thing we're going to do is press before we trim it down to the right size. Now I had marked with a blue pen. That pen is a Friction brand pen. They're very handy because once they are hit with the iron takes away all of that marking. So I'm going to just touch the iron to that block, and you see the blue line just disappeared. So I'm going to do that with all of them. So the question comes in, which way do we want to press? There are a lot of different ways to press, and it really is determined by how many seams are converging together in one point. What I want to do with these blocks is press to the dark side being the red. So we're going to start with the red side up. I'm going to just lift my red fabric up. Notice I'm not pressing on it, I'm not pushing it to put it in place. I'm just letting it, see how it just kind of stands up like that. And then I'm going to use the edge of my iron to gently, if it works, gently push it over and open up. So now I have my half square triangle block. I'm going to do that with the rest of them. I'm also pressing on a wool pressing mat, which is wonderful for quilting because it allows the heat not only to come from the top of the iron, but also radiate from the bottom to press it on both sides, so you have a nice crisp seam. Now, the instructions want for our half square triangle blocks to measure 4.5 inches. So we need to square it up. Squaring your blocks is a very important element of quilting, because these blocks, for as much as on the surface they look like they're the same size, they really are not. So we need to make sure that they are all the same size, because consistency ripples down the line. We want to make sure that each element is the exact size before we put it all together. So I'm going to show you exactly how to trim these up. So what I've done to prepare to square up the block, I've placed a square ruler, and it has a diagonal, a yellow diagonal going from corner to corner. I've placed that on my square. Now I need, for my finished block, to measure 4.5 inches. So I can see, if I follow this line here, I have red fabric overhanging beyond my 4.5 inch line. That's what I want. It's coming all the way down. I still have fabric overhanging at this point of the diagonal. On the ruler, it's following exactly along the diagonal of my block. That's what I want. Coming back down to the bottom left corner, here is the 4.5 inch line here, and I have, again, fabric that extends beyond the 4.5 inch line. If I look to the right hand edge, I do have some fabric hanging off here, and I do have a little bit of fabric hanging off the top. So once I have my square ruler placed right in the center of my half square triangle block, and I have enough fabric to trim off right, top, left, and bottom, then I can start trimming. You see, I didn't have much to trim off here. I have a little bit to trim off there. Now, once I have a clean edge on my right and a clean edge along the top, then I'm going to rotate my block. My diagonal is going in the same direction as the diagonal on my ruler. I'm going to line up my two clean edges. My diagonal is in place, and then the bottom edge is lined up also, 4.5 inch line coming across the bottom. Fabric along the top that needs to come off. And I got a little bit more off of those two edges, but what I now have is a perfect 4.5 inch square. So I'm going to do the same squaring with the other 3 half square triangle blocks. So the first element that we got taken care of, that we got made, is the half square triangle block. It's not only made 2 at a time, half square triangles. It's not only made, but we got those trimmed down to 4.5 inches, which is a finished size for each one of the elements for the block. Now the next element that we need to get taken care of is this one here with the 2 rectangles that are going to be sewn together. And we're going to do these, we're going to chain sew them, which is a super easy way of doing the same kind of stitching without breaking the thread. We're going to be saving ourselves a little bit of thread and the time that it takes to actually take the pieces out and clip the thread, load the new one on, sew it, take it out, clip the thread. We're going to save all of that time, and it's going to go by very, very quickly. So what we'll do, it doesn't matter which fabric you put on top. I'm just going to put the red one on top, line it up quickly here, and I'm going to put it into the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew them pretty quickly. Okay, so now what we have, I went ahead and sewed all of those rectangles together. I have 4 sets, and they are connected really by just 1 stitch in between. As you're sewing and you get to the very end, keep your needle down, raise your presser foot, insert the next one, and it leaves you with 1, maybe 2 stitches in between. Your elements are connected, kind of like bunting, right? So I'm going to go ahead and clip those apart. There we go. And now it's time to press. Now the instructions want you to press to the darker color. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the half square triangle blocks, but we're going to do it with these rectangles instead. Now once we're finished pressing these, I want to make sure that they measure up to the same size as the half square triangle blocks. And really, they should. And what do you know? I have an exact 4.5 inch square. What do I have here? I have my rectangles put together to make square. I have my half square triangle blocks, and then I have this single solitary green square. This is going to be the center of my overall block. It's time for me to go ahead and put everything together. So now basically what we're looking at is sewing a 9-patch block. Here is our finished block, and it looks very similar, of course, to the one that's up top. Now what we're going to do is sew it together just like we would a regular 9-patch block. I'm going to sew 1, 2, 3, this row together, set it aside. This row together, set it aside, this row together. Let's see that happen. Okay, so I went ahead and I sewed all of them together. Now what we have is an issue with our seams. So which way are we going to press? When we're working with a 9-patch block, what we want to make sure we do is nest your seams. The way we attain that is to make sure that all of them are going in, well, each row is going in the opposite direction to the one below it. So this one, I'm going to press these 2 seam allowances outward. On the center row, they're going to be pressed inward, and on the bottom row, they're going to be pressed outward, and it's going to look like this. But when I flip it over, there's a very good chance that I am not opening up my seams as far as they can go. I do not recommend pressing from the back of your block, because I can come back in now and push with the weight of the iron and open it up even more. Okay, so it makes a more full-size block and a flatter seam. So what I'm going to do with this one, rather than press it from this side, pushing the seam allowances in, I'm going to press it from this side to push the seam allowances in. Okay, so our seam allowances are pressed inward here. So bottom row is out, middle row is in, top row is out. So now I need to join the top row with the middle row. I'm going to fold them over like this, and because the top row fabric seam allowance is facing out and the bottom row is in, my seams are going to nest really well together. So when I put my top row together with my second row, I want to make sure that my seams nest together. This seam is the one I need to pay very close attention to. This seam allowance is going to the left. This one is going to the right. I can see that the seams are touching. They are nested really nicely together, and I'm going to pin. Now I'm going to pin on both sides of my seam allowance, just like this. And the reason why I want to pin on both sides of the seam allowance is because I want to make sure that the seam allowance fabric stays secure here, and the one on the back stays secure and it doesn't flip. It'll make a difference later on. So make sure you pin on both sides of your seam allowance. I'm going to pin here, and then at the ends, and then sew it together. Okay, so guys, I pinned the seams that are important that I just showed you, and I pinned at the corner right here. This pin is holding down the seam allowance for the half square triangle block that's right below. It is helpful to make sure that any seam that you cannot see, you have that pin in place. And you want to make sure that you are in control of everything that happens in the quilt as you're putting it together. So pin. It takes time, but it's not such a big deal. So I have the first 2 rows together, and I have my seams that matched up here. So I'm going to do the same thing with this bottom row to attach it to the center. All right, guys, so I have my block completely put together. I have not pressed my final 2 seams, which are running horizontally yet. And so that's the next thing I want to discuss with you. You can see how when I nested the seams to get these seams together, it really helps to make sure that that seam is seamless. The points for the white rectangles, they just kind of kiss and come together on all 4 spots. And you're going to hear me say all through these tutorials to nest your seams. And that's what I'm talking about, just getting those 2 seams, the opposite seams, to match up and lock together. Now, in terms of pressing. I did not press these horizontal seams. What I'm going to do is press them open. This whole time we've either been pressing to the left or to the right. We've been pressing to the dark or in opposite directions so that our seams can nest. But this time I want to press so that the seams are open. And the reason for that is because there is a bunch of seaming going on. This diagonal seam, for example, coming together here, and then we have this vertical seam coming together, hitting the horizontal seam right there. So what I want to do is press the seams open. The reason for pressing your seams open is to disperse the bulk of the fabric so that it's not all going in one place or in one direction. That is an important thing to do when you're looking ahead and thinking about quilting. Well, what am I going to do to quilt this in the end? You may decide that you want to quilt this on your domestic machine. You can stitch in the ditch or do crosshatch stitching. That would be fine, a beautiful option. You might decide that you want to take it to the spa and give it to a long arm quilter to quilt for you. Also a fabulous option. Either way you look at it, you want to make sure that your quilt lays flat as it can. And if you're pushing your seams out, then that's going to help whoever it is quilting your quilt to make sure that the quilting looks the best that it can. When I flip it over, I can give it one more good press and we're finished. We are finished putting together one of the 3 blocks that the instructions had given us to cut. Putting the other 2 blocks together will just fly by very quickly. It looks pretty good. So guys, we've gotten through the entire block. You can see how this block looks a little bit different from the blue one that's up on the wall, just because the center focus is a little bit brighter on that one than it is here. Playing with color, playing with fabrics is really a lot of fun, and it gives you different looks for each one of the blocks, even though you're making the same thing over and over. If you've gotten this far in the video, fantastic. You have learned some new skills. Kudos to you. If you've made it this far, go ahead and comment below a sewing emoji, something that says sewing. Tell me that you're still here. I'm going to be putting out more videos in this series. There are 9 blocks, and then of course I'm going to show you how to put the quilt together in the end. So we're looking at what, 10 videos to get you through the entire quilt. So I want you guys to check back and get some more tips and fill that toolkit with information to help your quilting journey. All of my information is down in the description box below. Links to my website, aneedleandthread.com, links to my social media, Facebook, Instagram, links also to get the pattern and the fabric kit to make this quilt along with me. Subscribe so that you will be notified every time a new video comes out. I'm not just doing quilts. You see that I've done some hand embroidery, I've done some bags, so come on back and see what else I have to make and show you how to do. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.